That's something different. So, Bitcoin mining bans are on the horizon, and of course, the miners are saying there may be unintended environmental consequences.
Wait, what did you say about what was on the rise?
So, there are a bunch of concerns about Bitcoin mining bans leading to unintended environmental consequences.
I was struggling to like mentally construct something, and I was like, is this like rock bands or like okay, but like yeah, okay, got it. That makes more sense.
I was reading about this, and it's like, wait, this doesn't make sense. If they turn off the machines and the requirements for electricity are reduced, then energy generation will decrease. Clearly, there's something that I'm missing.
Well, it's the issue of they brought up the contracts, and so because they're not making as much on mining, they turn off the miners and then sell the electricity back to the grid when it's more profitable. But they've like obviously their actual mining farms um emit a lot of CO2, but now that Bitcoin has gone back up, they probably fired up the farms again. So it's like it's
That makes
interesting
sense.
to watch how the
That actually
farms
makes
have
sense.
like well, and it's like the block rewards have become such that yeah, it sometimes it's better to just turn off your miner instead of just paying for electricity because that's what it ends up being. If you can't just let the Bitcoin sit there, it's like it's too costly. Like usually the miners would be able to cash out what they need to pay for electricity and then keep mining on top of that for actual profit. But the market, the returns on the block rewards have been as such that it's not really like unless you have the most energy efficient miners possible, it just hasn't really been worth turning them on. So I've had some miners sitting off for like years now, just waiting for it to hit a point where it's actually worth it. But
To
you
make
know,
it
they're
worth it, one would have to be gifted like many tens, if not hundreds, of kilowatts of solar panel generation capabilities. Right?
well, and to
Basically,
get that, it's like you have to have at least 20 grand worth of investment in the solar panels um to get that kind of the wattage that it would take to get there. And so probably actually more than that. I think I had like estimated in the ballpark of 20 grand as far as like the minimum investment
just
to
to
get,
ooh,
which again that's where you have to then make that back to make it viable because then it's like nobody nobody's just giving away power.
yeah, and photovoltaic arrays are not free or cheap. They have to be maintained. Got to keep them clean. Got to make sure connectors aren't like somehow failing. It's not just like a set it and forget it, like walk away kind of scenario.
Right, dust can fuck your shit up.
Power regulators, your inverter, so you can store battery energy because there could be times when that system's not producing electricity, like night.
Well, and when you're talking about that much electricity in a concentrated area, it's like even the a minimal amount of dust can like cause a spark and fire, and that shit can just escalate out of control really quickly. So it's like
Oh man,
you
so
really can't just let it sit, and the heat that it puts off is so high. Like
I remember when I was looking into solar panels, like the region, the latitude that we are at in Indiana is means that like at best we get like 60, maybe 70 80% power output from the panels on the best possible day, but on average, like 60% output. So, you know, a 10 kilowatt field is really only a 6 kilowatt solar array.
Right. Yeah.
And to hit that 10 kilowatt mark, you actually need, like, practically twice as much output, twice the array. More hardware, more controller, bigger controller, more batteries. None of that's cheap yet. Hopefully someday, right?
Right. Yeah.
Some genius is going to figure out how to make, like, what was that, one mole thick carbon substrate. People were making it on like CDs and CD-ROMs. They'd mix water and anyways, I remember there was a lot of attention being paid to, like, these material advances, and can we use these as capacitors? Can we fold them? Can we roll them up? And of course, here we are, like a decade or two later, and a lot of this stuff is so advanced now. When I look at any of the research into battery storage or power storage or just capacitance, it's just like, man, I needed like a degree in physics or at the very least electrical engineering to really understand some of the stuff that's available now. It's really cool stuff. But the batteries technology is still not like accessible. It's still extremely expensive.
But at the same time, it's like almost
Also,
the same as it's ever been in terms of like it's just at different scales because of the materials.
Yeah.
But it's like basically the same structure that it's always been, which that shit blew my mind because I happened to see a video of someone refurbishing a lipo cell battery, and it was like it just looked like any other fucking battery on the inside. And that's where it's like, holy shit, battery technology, the materials have definitely changed, but the structure is fundamentally like the same. It's like, it's really crazy. Like that shit it's those types of things where it's like nuclear power is basically just a steam engine at fucking gigantic scale, where it's like
crazy to think that like the problems that the most advanced batteries face today are the same problems that they've been facing since they were running on, chemical reactions that are absolutely 100% going to give us cancer. And these are problems that are just like due to the nature of electron flow. It's kind of surprising. Like, no matter what materials get used, the same problems persist. Eventually, something in the battery degrades, and then something starts building up somewhere, and then it fails, and then poof, it's either done or it catches on fire now. I watched, actually, you reminded me. I watched a video of a guy recharging a deep cell battery using a welder, of all things, and like completely resurrecting this battery. He touched the terminals with his voltmeter and showed that there was like nothing going on, and then proceeded to hook it up to a machine and bring it back to life. It was crazy. The whole time I was expecting the battery to like explode.
Yeah, it's like, oh, yeah, that type of shit is so possible, but then the dudes who are usually doing it are so relaxed. It's like, I think they're
way too casual about it.
Well, no, did you ever see Community? There was like that character Blade where he like had a railroad spike go in his head and took away his inhibition. It's like the guys that work
the carny.
Right. It's like the guys that work on rebuilding fucking batteries are like that in terms of just their complete lack of care about fucking battery acid or the shit exploding. And I think that's what actually makes them capable of getting through it. Because if you start like worrying about, what's happening, second guessing, that's when shit starts to go wrong. It's like you really kind of have to like lock in and fucking just go through your paces when you're dealing with like those kinds of acids and those types of possible reactions.
Yeah, I think that's like the number one reason that I was never drawn towards chemistry, despite all of the cool things that can be
Right.
done in the kitchen, which is like the safest version of the chemistry. Can still, steam happens, boiling oil happens.
Oh yeah.
There's still a lot of knives. There are a lot of things that can go wrong in a kitchen, but that's at least you get to eat it. And burns are bad. There are some acids like vinegar or other naturally occurring. Sometimes you use like some people will use like a powdered citric acid in certain types of desserts. But even then, like that's relatively safe compared to the bulk of like battery chemistry. Like when we get down to it, like I can't.
Yeah.
I saw a video of these dudes who bought or who had a unrefurbishable battery from a hybrid vehicle, and they had it in the back of a truck, and they just proceeded to like jam at it with a fucking crowbar
Oh
until
God.
oh, this is how crazy it was. Like the batteries were all swollen. The
Oh
battery
my God.
the
Oh
battery was
God.
done. Like all the little like cells were all swollen. So when they popped the retaining armature off of it, this cross member, the thing like ruptured and sent these little cells the size of like a deck of cards, you know, 100 of them probably, just spread them out all over this yard. And then one by one they started catching on fire, bursting into a flame, like a jet flame, smoking, and then fire. They just one by one, it was like that battery was going to do that. It was just a matter of time before that happened.
Right. And if it was like more enclosed than not and created like a shrapnel situation.
Like yeah, exactly. Like removing that cross member and allowing those cells to escape was like actually the safest way for
Right.
those people to be
that was the
around,
safest end.
for to be around it while it's happening. Obviously, the safest way is to be nowhere near it. And
Right. Well, yeah, for sure. In
but
terms of being that close.
but yeah, being close enough to get video and to like it's a lot better that those things flew out of the enclosure they were contained in. It was nuts. And so to think that, like, man, that could happen to a vehicle while it's driving down the road, because the batteries don't all fail, the cells don't all fail simultaneously. It's like a couple fail, or a couple get too hot, or a region gets too hot, and those batteries get diverted. The power gets diverted away from them because they've failed, because the controllers are smart like that now. But then the whole battery can still fail. The whole system can still fail if, like, one portion of it catches on fire.
Mhm. Well, and it's also like everything isn't waterproofed,
Yeah.
and water is always trying to find the path of least resistance and getting in those places. So it's like that can, make something that's working not work in a split second.
It's interesting. I read about Teslas catching on fire. I read about Chinese EVs catching on fire. I rarely do I ever read about like the European EVs catching on fire. Rarely have very rarely. I haven't read about a Rivian catching on fire in a while. I've read about a Rivian getting like into a fender bender and totaling out the entire vehicle because it was too expensive to fix the bumper. And I've never read about a Lucid catching on fire. Like the alternative premium electric vehicles in America. Like I never read about those catching on fire. It's always Teslas or some rebadged Chinese EV that like GM brings to America that catches on fire. Or it's actually like in China, like a whole fleet of EVs sitting in a lot outside of a factory or a corporate headquarters catches on fire simultaneously. And it's like not just the batteries problem, it's like the power distribution, of course, it's all dodgy. Or a row of fucking EVs in like a shopping district catching on fire. That's like the weirdest shit. So I can't
I
even,
mean, but it
I
also
can't tell if it's the batteries or if it's the charging network because I can't read Chinese and all I'm watching is like videos.
I don't think it's.
stuff.
I don't think that. I don't think it's either. I don't think it's has anything to do with anything. I don't think you can compare the markets in that the European market has way more hybrids and it lags behind both the American and the Chinese market.
Yeah.
So it's not that they don't have any fires, it's just that their market isn't as
It's
saturated
just
with
tiny.
EVs.
Yeah, and I also know that the EU put a huge tariff on Chinese EVs. They're like,
Yeah.
sorry
Yeah.
about you. We aren't going to help you subsidize this, which is like pretty smart.
Well, and it's like the numbers make it seem like they're safer, but again, that could possibly just be because they're
The
not as
sample size,
ubiquitous.
yeah, the
Yeah, the
sample's too
sample
small.
size.
It'll be interesting to see because right now it looks like the hybrids are still on track to longevity. Like most of the hybrids seem to be have long lasting battery power. A lot of the early Teslas also seem to have pretty decent power capabilities, like long after 10 years in. Still, it's still one of those things. Like I'm so skeptical because every time I've had a battery powered device like a camera or a computer or anything, I've always ended up having to replace the battery at some point, and it was like well before it reached only 60% of capability. Actually, by the time they reach 60% of capability, they aren't even that capable. It's like 30 minutes of battery power. It's like enough time to move your computer from your desk to a different desk.
So the EU actually has a bigger EV market.
Really,
Um,
we just don't get any of the European electric vehicles then, of course.
but there's actually fewer EV fires in the United States than in Europe. So it's like we're just not seeing the articles because we're
Okay.
not there.
Yeah, so it's really like a regional reporting issue. Like
Yeah,
there are a
exposure
ton of
bias.
Teslas on the road, and of course we're going to hear about them because there's a giant, totally like invested uh, gasoline industry.
Like even though we're not hearing about it, they're actually having more fires because they have more vehicles. Where
Huh.
it looks like we have more vehicles and we have more fires because they're not telling us anything of our media isn't telling us anything about European market because it's apparently not important.
uh,
Yeah, China's number one, Europe, EU number two, United States number three,
oh, I would have
Norway.
I would have totally guessed that China's like number one in EV fires. Almost all of the videos of electric vehicle fires that I see are definitely in China.
Well, right, but there's like four times as many
Yeah,
people.
no, I mean, but that totally makes sense, and it makes just as much sense that like not only are they having issues with like getting delivering power, but like the actual charging facility networks themselves have complex issues that aren't being that I can't digest because I can't read Chinese, and Google Translate sucks sometimes, like really sucks. Although I did copy paste a bunch of Chinese text into the chat with Chat RTX because they provide a language model that can decipher Chinese, and it spat out a lot of information, like way more than I was asking for. It'll be interesting though to see like how this all really pans out.
They're making it seem like the numbers are hard to find, but then being like there's 7 car fires every day. So like it's it's one of those weird situations again, same shit where they did with North Korea where it's like they don't have any internet, but they're hacking everything over here. They have 26 websites, but they infiltrated Silicon Valley. Like, yeah.
There's only like 25 fires per 100,000 EVs sold, according to NTSB, compared to 1,530 vehicle fires for every 100,000 gas powered vehicles.
Right.
Like, that's like an order of magnitude safer.
I mean, but again, it's like there's just an order of magnitude more
Yeah.
number of ICE vehicles than EVs. So it's like I I'm always of the mind where I'm like looking at the practices, and we're in a period where it's like quality and safety can be undermined for the sake of profit for the shareholder, and that doesn't equate to the best EV. So I
Also,
know for a fact. Go ahead. Sorry.
none of these headlines are in any way making a qualitative assessment of the numbers that they report inside the articles.
Right.
They're all salacious. They're not even trying to indicate, oh yeah, this stuff
Yeah,
is
you can't.
actually safe. It's electric
Yeah.
vehicles in focus, electric vehicle fire risk, and then it recites the same numbers that I just read earlier.
Right. It's definitely something that got paid for by like Chevy or Ford or some shit.
Same.
To like,
This whole page of Google results has the same numbers that I read at the top of the search. EV car fires in USA per year. They're all the same numbers, but electric vehicles in focus. Oh wait, here's one motor trend. You're wrong about EV fires. That's the only one.
I got that one too on the second page now. Um,
Like what's going on here? Why is this? Am I like desensitized to gasoline powered vehicles catching on fire or diesel powered vehicles catching on fire? Is that what that really means? I'm just like, oh
no, I
yeah.
mean, I think the issue is, even though we didn't live through it, you know about the Gremlin and the Pinto and
Oh
shit
yeah.
like that. So it's like, or the Fiero. So it's like, that production vehicles that were internal combustion made it to market that would explode.
Oh, there's some Hyundais and Kias that exploded for a while recently.
For sure. And so it's like, it's hard for that propaganda to land on someone who knows enough about the history of factory recalls before they were alive to try to make it seem like these recalls are like specific to EVs. And it's like, again, when you contextualize that EVs are like 100 years behind, at least 100 years if we're being generous, like if not more, like 150 to 200 years behind development and internal combustion, then it contextualizes like, yeah, of course they're not going to have the same failure rates.
The rate of hybrid vehicle fires is 3,474 fires per 100,000.
That's a lot.
That's worse than twice for ICE vehicles.
Yeah, that's a lot.
I would have thought it would have been a little bit less, but apparently,
there's more. But there's not more than ICE.
There's more hybrids than EV.
Right, and so I think that's also going to be in a situation where it's like those are in. They're going to be in places like Los Angeles or Atlanta or DC or wherever where people are getting in accidents frequently.
Oh, that's a good insight.
Because it's like nobody on a farm is using a fucking hybrid.
You know, I watched a video of a farmer who went and bought a not a Cybertruck. It was I think it was the Rivian, and tried to use it for farm duties, and maybe it was an F-150 Lightning, Anyways, they tried to use it for farm duties, and they ended up not using it for farm duties. It spent more time recharging than it did doing anything because it turns out you can't actually pull anything with those things. They just
Well,
eat
and
the batteries.
that's where they have those gas powered gators. You see the utility
Yeah.
workers using those instead of electric because they're they last longer, they can go up hills better, they do a lot of things better um under different types of environmental stresses, and that's kind of where the electric motors just aren't there yet. So it's like
Yeah.
once they get there, yeah, it'll be
It's actually it's interesting. You had me thinking about like off-road vehicles actually just now because of gators can actually climb up some pretty impressive inclines. Um, but the problem with those is the low speeds is that with electric motors they just heat up because they're not moving fast enough to cool themselves off. But then like with a lot of utility vehicles, there are some that run on like you know liquid propane where they're like sipping fuel and can run at extremely low RPM and not overheat because they run on an exceptionally clean fuel. And of course, that's not like good for the average person because they don't reduced power per liter of fuel kind of thing, and it's really not practical to to drive around with that much propane. Um, but there are a lot of alternatives for like utility or service roles for vehicles that wouldn't see any kind of street or highway travel, mostly because they don't actually go that fast and are probably unsafe at those speeds. Like I don't think I hope a fire engine can travel 55 miles an hour, but it really shouldn't be traveling that fast. Those things weigh a ton, especially the ones that have water in them.
well, and it's like it's okay if they can travel that fast if they can brake quickly, but they usually can't because they're so heavy. So I think that's the issue in
Are
terms of
roads even designed to withstand that kind of stress?
no, definitely,
I'm
not.
pretty sure that like logging companies have to get like bonds for the roads that they're going to use because it's going to damage the road, and they
Mhm.
have to pay for the damage that's going to happen to that road. And it's like put into a fund for repairing that section of road eventually. Like, pretty sure anytime anything that's super large or super heavy requires like some kind of bond that secures that travel and repair of the road.
Right, but that's also why the government just can't roll tanks in everywhere too.
Yeah.
As much as all these doomsday people are worried about, it's like, yeah, our roads aren't fucking capable of supporting the government's like tanks to roll out like that. So
No, our roads are built to transport goods along infrastructure.
barely.
We have military bases to distribute our tanks and aircraft or something like that.
Well, and it's like the highways, I think, can, you know, support the transport, but like I don't know if a tank could,
Oh no, tanks destroy pavement.
yeah. And so like one, let alone like a fucking column.
Man, there are no mechanized infantry that are crossing the Rockies. If the road infrastructure is destroyed and those tunnel networks are destroyed, nobody is crossing the Rockies in a mechanized infantry. It's just not happening.
I mean, just imagine
Like,
tanks trying to use 37 or 69 or fucking 465. That shit would fall apart so
oh
fast.
man, or 465, it just wouldn't be able to take it.
Not at all. Not at no point. At no point.
At some point,
Even at the biggest point, that shit would just get torn the fuck up.
oh man, the last time that I drove up, well, when I drove up to visit, and I drove along portions of 465, it was like 100% construction zone the entire time. There was it,
Mm.
it didn't it. There's only been a few times in my life when I feel like I could when I want to remember that there was no construction on 465, but I'm pretty sure it's always had some kind of bullshit going on
I don't
because
think it used to when we were kids, because I remember
I remember being
like,
relatively clear for a while. Like
well, yeah, because it was like you could drive around the whole thing when we were kids. Because I remember
I
it
remember
took about
driving around the whole thing when I as a young adult. You know, my
right.
you
It
know
took about 40 minutes to go all the way around, but you could, if you were following the speed limit, and if
yeah.
you like sped, you could do it in 20 because people
I
would
always
race.
dreamed about like Indianapolis closing down 465 and holding some kind of marathon endurance race around 465, like some 24-hour, like just epic, like the Indy 5000 or something like that. However many miles it would be a lot. 24 hours of 465. That would be awesome. Never happened though.
Yeah.
They could make the racers stop at designated fueling locations. There's a huge money making opportunity, but convincing like grand touring racers to drive around the loop of Indianapolis, that would actually be a really cool series. Like, because there are a lot of cities that have loops.
Oh yeah.
That'd be a great series because some of those roads, well, a lot of those roads suck, but there are extended portions that are really good. And I know that I've driven on the loops of some cities where some idiot has passed me going well in excess of the speed limit, like potentially, probably, very highly likely into triple digits excess of the speed limit type stuff. And like, God,
Well, there's like a couple gigantic holes on 465 that they would definitely have to fix.
yeah.
But that would be
Maybe like a super bike race, you know, like something where it's all motorcycles just going balls out the whole time.
so. On that note, have you ever heard of Initial D?
Oh yeah, the anime about drifting.
Yeah, I've been watching it, but it's funny. Like, I used to play the Midnight Club racing series, not realizing that there was like a whole actual culture in Japan that was like actually doing that. Because I think whenever like Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift came out, the movies kind of co-opted the culture, and the video games became so over the top that it was hard to realize that they were actually doing that shit in real life. So like watching Initial D now and seeing how accurate the TV show was trying to be in terms of like reflecting the culture, but also in that now getting there's like a whole race culture and street racing culture in Japan that kind of like it's not the same here, in that the street racing culture here is a lot more like drag racing,
Yeah.
and sometimes you get in modern times you'll get more of the highway racers, but even then it's almost like drag like 60 to quarter miles type shit, or
So
60 to whoever wins the whoever passes and gets away.
I think that there's a very simple explanation for that. um, Japan has a lot of really unique roads through hills and mountains areas and challenging terrain, whereas the United States is mostly grids and straight lines. And while there is a culture of driving on ridge running or driving through the twisties, I think that you know the culture of driving fast in America largely comes from hot rodding cars and evading police while running moonshine. And then
Right. Well,
and
that's
so
one. There's multiples because
I know,
that's
but
where it's like
that's like
the
the
oldest one.
that's like
That's the oldest one.
that's the fundamental hot rodding of the cars in America.
Right.
And
But
it
then
wouldn't be
after
for
that,
like
in the 50s,
decades until they started going around twisties really quick because the British are making those roadsters that can go around corners and they look a lot of fun, like they're a lot of fun. Then you got guys like Carroll Shelby who makes a car that can go around corners at full speed.
right. But what I'm getting at is that stayed on the track for the most part in
Yeah.
America. It never
Yeah.
really came to the roads, and so this is where the American street racing is like because of the hot rod. Like I'm not saying you're wrong at all, and in fact, I think there was like the extension of the hot rodding in the 40s and 50s that lended itself to like straight line,
Oh
um
yeah. Well,
mainly because power steering hadn't like been invented yet,
so
so it's like going to be really hard to get those heavy fucking huge engine vehicles turning really quickly when you have to be goddamn Hercules to
so
make a move like
back
that.
in the 40s, Ford made what would now be described as a pure racing engine. It was a cross-plane dual overhead cam, so four cam overhead cam V8, and they built it to power a tank for the U.S. military. And mechanically, just thinking about it, two banks of cylinders, each with a pair of overhead cams, cross planes. So it has this completely different way of aligning the connecting rods on the crankshaft than a typical engine. They sound different. They run different. We really only see them in racing engines because they run more efficiently at higher RPMs, I guess. That stuff, and they've been able to develop those kinds of geared systems, machine systems for long before the hot rodding culture ever got to it. So I think what's really interesting is that hot rodding culture has always been able to extract like seemingly more from less by doing really simple things. And not all of those things compromise long-term stability or reliability of the power plant. Like in the 90s, I knew people who had like the second gen Eclipses, and they were always doing crazy stuff to them. I always loved those cars. I always thought they looked great. But most of them would end up blowing up their cars because they were always on this quest for more power. Got to go faster. Want to keep up with some hardcore imaginary Corvette that they're going to go race at the strip. And I only know. No, actually, no. The only person I know who has an Eclipse that they didn't do anything to and it still runs like a champ is one of my friend's dad. And I think the moral of that story is that a finely balanced machine can run forever if it's not tinkered with. But now cars, you can't do anything to them because you just can't. They're already at like terminal or peak performance. They're all extracting like the highest levels of power to input possible without compromising reliability. Unless you want to, build an engine from the ground up and tune a fuel map yourself and be completely involved in that level of vehicle tuning. But that's like a professional level
Well,
thing.
and to that note, that's why any of the cars that are like 1,000 horsepower or whatever, it's going to be an older vehicle.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, and not even it could be like early 2000s because, like you're saying, anything past like 2008, 2009, it's going to have too much computer based gearing or computer based adjustment
I
so
think there
that
are
a
some
person's
1,000
like
horsepower factory vehicles, but those are like Hellcats and super tuned Mercedes and
right, but
McLarens and I
to
think there's a
that to
1,000
that point,
horsepower
like
Corvette.
a mod, like somebody who mods vehicles isn't going to actually be able to get it
No.
much more, and so that's where like you're saying um, the companies are selling highest end possible modded versions of those vehicles, and they're not like stock, obviously, but they are pre-built to the point where you can't. They're just like, it's not even behind paywalls so much as you have to have the right software, and if you don't have the right software, you can lock some shit up and never unlock it, and the risk is just too high to like modify cars
You
like that.
gotta go back to a dealership, or they have to send your computer back in to get it reflashed, and then they have to have all the other information like your VIN and stuff, so everything is correct, so that when it initializes, everything comes online properly. It sounds like we're turning on a really hardcore computer system. Like
I mean,
that's the thing. Yeah,
basically,
that's I think
and
that's the thing.
anymore. But that's, but that's not mainly because for all of those things to coexist electronically, that's where the computers need to
Yeah,
come in
yeah.
and balance all the loads. Because a person, especially when you start putting music into the equation, where it's like now a person is wanting to run like a fucking 1,000 watts worth of music while they're driving at fucking 70 miles an hour. And it's like, well, they're wondering why they're going, like killing their battery, and it's like, well, they might have to actually have a second battery if they're going to do some shit like that. So it's like there are user demands that, because everybody doesn't understand how electricity works, but they can buy cars and they can buy stereo systems and they can fucking floor the vehicle, because even though there's a governor, the best part of the speed is like the 0 to whatever, or like the 60 to whatever, not even really the top end. So it doesn't really matter if they have a governor in there if the acceleration isn't limited. So it's like,
I'm actually a proponent or advocate of the GPS or location based speed control. So in like areas that are school zones where it's and even make it time based, because certain school zones are only school zones during school hours, and then afterwards they're like 30-mile-an-hour zones. But like in a school zone, all the vehicles can only go 25 miles an hour. That makes sense to me.
I mean, it makes sense if you can retrofit it to cars that were built before 2024, but you can't. Like, unless the government pays for it, which everybody's then not going to want to do it. So it's one of those. It would be amazing, but too many people in America
They
are
got to
like
just start building it.
selfish.
They have to start building it into cars now and not turn it on until 2035. And then it just gets turned on overnight during like daylight savings time when everyone's asleep. And everyone wakes up and like, wait, why can't I go faster? Then everyone Googles it and they say, oh, this happened. Of course, everyone
Well,
gets
if
mad
it's
as
by
hell. But what can everyone
2035,
do?
we could have it so that we're like all in like high speed rails and we don't need fucking cars anymore. You know what I mean? If it's that far out, because I think that's the issue, is like we've gone away from rail based systems in America, and like
I just want
for
stepping
whatever,
discs.
I don't know, whatever the automotive propaganda machine has done to make it seem like railways were like evil in America, but it worked. Whatever they did, that shit worked. Because then you see, like, man, when regular in other countries, when regular trains are like going above 100 miles an hour and they're not even calling them high speed rails, it's like, what the fuck are we doing here? What the fuck is happening? Because that's also the type of shit we don't hear about. Like, I'm sure people have heard of the high speed trains in other countries, but again, that includes the fact that their regular trains are going above 100 miles an hour.
It's interesting. Trains in America are slow, and they're like relics, like technological relics compared to modern trains. But whenever I read about trains, like in China, a country that has an extensive, well, yeah, train mass transit system. They've got all sorts of cool technology. They're trying different things. They have some very sophisticated train systems. Like, so does Japan. So does Europe. So I think France has a bunch of really advanced trains or something like that, right? But I always read about this stuff, and it's only in the context of like, oh, something happened. Not a good thing. It's never a good thing. It's not like, oh yeah, this new train was brought online. It can travel this distance at, 80% of the power consumption of the previous system.
Well, and that's in the same way they're not telling you about the fucking EV fires in Europe.
Or
Like,
the low likelihood of electric vehicle fire, as it turns out, that they're not actually
right.
catching on fire the way that people
all
think they
all of
are.
this quote unquote information is really propaganda. It's really the problem with our current information framework is that we were raised with this notion that there's a such thing as unbiased information. That's not true. In a mass media context where people are the ones that create the information, there's no such thing as unbiased information. But our fucking dumbass grandparents and our fucking dumbass parents believed that there was ever such a thing. Not any, again, it's not any individual. I'm not pointing at our parents specifically. I'm not pointing at our grandparents specifically, but their generations thought that the Mike Wallaces and the fucking whoever Dan Rathers or whatever are actually like telling them unbiased information, as if those people are qualified to judge what they're telling a person, whether it's like valid or not. Especially the further, like, the only real thing a person as like a newscaster can actually do is like they can be like, oh, there's a storm, I'm in it, you see me in the storm. And if that person is telling the truth about that, that's about the closest we can get to seeing an honest, unbiased opinion. Because I've been around a camera when they're trying to present turmoil, and whatever they're focused on, there's a whole bunch of shit that they're not focused on that they're leaving out, that then constructs the narrative that literally makes it impossible for them to tell an unbiased story. So especially when it comes to conflict, if there's cameras involved, that shit is biased as fuck. It may be a bias that you agree with, but there's definitely a bias. There's no such thing as fucking unbiased information when a camera gets involved. And again, that's where it's like the framing of bias has been really bastardized, because I don't, it's when it comes to human created information, I don't know if it's even possible to create unbiased information. It to me it seems like the only unbiased information that exists can be only be discovered. It can't be created. So what that looks like is like math. Humans don't create math, they discover math. Or like electricity. Humans don't create electricity, they discover it. And so those things can be unbiased information in the same way that when we're talking about MIDI controllers, like it has a scale of negative 127 to 0 to positive 127. That's unbiased because it's quantitative. Not to say that qualitative uh, collections can't be unbiased, but qualitative by definition has bias. So this is where, again, once we start talking about anything qualitative has bias. And so the decision
Man, you
to
just
then,
reminded me of probably the most biased media voice that I could think of is Andy Rooney. who I love. Like I always enjoyed his 60-minute segments where he's like being real frank and being like a grumpy old man. But I'm pretty sure that like his entire like routine was just completely a biased routine. I'm not saying that he's like
Oh yeah,
any
oh
more
yeah,
biased than Rush Limbaugh or Alex Jones or Joe Rogan or any of those other heads. They're all equally biased in their own portion of the spectrum. But like Andy Rooney was one of those guys that, for whatever reason, his delivery I could actually digest, and it's like, man, I'll listen to this. Whatever kind of voodoo magic that guy was casting, like I that was some bait that I was going after, I guess is what I'm saying.
right. And again, it's like, of course he has bias, but the way that it's presented is in such a way that his grandfatherly demeanor makes something that everyone can kind of relate to, and his matter of factness and his confidence in his delivery makes it such that it doesn't matter what he's saying. It's like it's gonna sound like the heartbeat of
Yeah, you
America,
you want to you want to agree with it.
right? And you want him to be honest with you, and you want him to be morally correct because he's like on TV and he's wearing a suit and he's like
And he's
kind
been
of
doing it for
upset,
years. Yeah, he's upset too. Yeah.
but he's like holding back his anger and delivering with this like, this is what needs to happen next if we're going to move forward kind of demeanor that makes you want to like believe that he's doing it for everyone's best interest and not because he selfishly believes he's right. And that's ultimately the problem with like having those kinds of talking heads, but humans need them. It's like one of those things where somebody was like presenting this framework where it's not anybody's fault, but humans like there's this desire to like not want to have leaders or like kings and queens or whatever, but humans have needed those perpetually for thousands of years. So I'm not about to sit here and delude myself into thinking that suddenly we're not going to need a president anymore or we're not going to need a fucking um, parliament or a fucking congress or a group of perceived to be elite people that virtue signal and pretend to be smarter than everyone else as win socks for the nation and win socks for morality because that's what humans do. It's like until everyone has an education and a confidence level that justify each other, those types of like examples are going to persist. And you know, part of it is like most Americans don't have a good enough education to justify confidence in their understanding of information. And then a lot of Americans have a way overconfident sense of like their capacity to justify that information that doesn't then correlate to an education or a media literacy. Um, so it's like there there's propaganda, there's advertisement, there's fucking just full on manipulation attempt. And among that, there's unbiased information scattered and littered very sporadically. And regular ass people think they can find that information on Facebook, let alone where they're looking.
Oh
So
my
it's like,
god. It takes me
you know what I mean?
hours of scouring the internet to find like actual white papers from like legitimate research into battery technology. It's not the kind of thing that you just like stumble upon while scouring the forums or the threads.
And then you got to make sure that white paper isn't paid for.
Well, it's also you have to make sure that white paper is not completely out of date, or
Right.
like
Yeah.
something that it's
All that.
not And it's hard to tell when you're looking at some online PDF viewer. It's like, is this thing even showing me what I think I'm supposed to be seeing?
So one of the things I do is peer review papers, and it's so funny to me. Like, I don't know. I mean, I know what happens, but it's like I feel like I could write an anime that like portrays the internal battle that goes on and make it actually like interesting, because it's like when I'm dissecting a very poorly constructed article, that person might as well have just gotten sliced up by a fucking katana. And it's like there's been times where after my reviews, the people will like write an angry letter to the publication. And it's like there's nothing they can do but write an angry letter. But it's funny to me in that knowing what people are doing when they're presenting these things, it's like the way that they're presenting the information, it's like they know that regular people are going to assume that they're unbiased, and then they'll say some super biased shit in the context of those papers and not have anything to back it up. And so it's like seeing it happen and seeing people try to slip it by peer review, it's hilarious to me that like these people are out there. But then what's funny is that I know that there's people like me out there to then slap it down and fucking just demolish these people academically. So it's like I'm not the exception. I'm the rule as like the literal example and the standard. So it's like when I see people like Joe Rogan talking about academia, it's so uninformed and disconnected from the reality of like you be one of the reasons it sucks that peer reviewers don't get paid to peer review, but one of the reasons that they don't get paid to peer review is because then you know that they're not being influenced by a dollar when it comes to determining if something passes peer review or not. So someone can get paid to write a paper, but because of the way peer reviewing is structured, it's like that is not actually conducive to having those like propaganda pieces make it through. So a lot of them get compartmentalized to white papers and archive. So it's like there's a wave of pseudo publications being put forth in STEM because of these practices, and like then regular people aren't going to be able to know what the difference is. So that's where a lot of the shit that then trickles down to like Alex Jones and fucking Joe Rogan types are these fringe academics that aren't actually passing peer review, and they're able to stay on the edge of academia because somebody's paying them to write these papers and write these articles that don't pass peer review, but they look good enough to trick dumbass VCs and fucking regular people. And that's like having been on both the academic side and the VC like seeking side, I can see how there's that interplay between pseudo academia and venture capital, because it's super lucrative, and that's the irony of all of it. It's like somebody who's doing pseudo academic writing is going to make way more money than somebody who does actual academic writing. Main thing being academia is not something people get into to get rich. I like uh to the contrary of what is being presented by pseudo academics and pseudo intellectuals like Joe Rogan. Because it's like, yeah, Joe Rogan started his podcast to get rich. He didn't start his podcast to learn anything. He started his podcast to sell advertising space. Otherwise, he'd have a motherfucking degree by now if that was the real case. Or he would have turned the Joe Rogan experience into fucking Joe Rogan University if it was really about validating credible information. That's not what he gives a fuck about. But his dumbass followers bought his grift and aren't smart enough to discern what he's like grifting them with in terms of like making it. He looks like he's trying to get smarter when he brings people on, but even down to the way he doesn't really he never actually really intellectually engages with the subject matter of the people who are coming on. It's just surface level enough to look like engagement. And that's where, again, it's like, if you've never talked to somebody who's a specialist in those areas, then you wouldn't know that he's not actually taking them to the depths. And again, it's because he's not capable. That's why he couldn't shut Terrence Howard down. And it's issues like that where after all this time, you'd think it'd be more obvious to his followers that he's not a philosopher and he's not an intellectual and he is a grifter, but they're just not smart enough to see it. And I think that's like, there's a ton of those people in America. It's like, and Britain too. I think a lot of his audience is in Britain. But it's like the same. There's a large crossover with his audience and people who are still into Elon Musk, and it's funny to me to see all of the people that I mean, there's only one person I can think of who I know for certain that I like ostracized by talking negatively about Joe Rogan. But it was like, it was completely unexpected and it wasn't like intentional. So I wasn't like trying to ostracize this dude over Joe Rogan. But seeing it happen, it was an eye opener in terms of like the way I don't know how much you've listened to Joe Rogan, but he talked about starting a cult like very frequently. And it was something that he would joke about with his, there was like this small group of friends that he was like, we'll start a commune and, you know, it'll be like you and X, Y, and Z. And he would always joke about this stuff with this certain group of people. But in retrospect, I'm realizing that the way that they would talk about it, it gave this certain part of the audience this false sense of being part of his cult or being part of his group or what, I don't know.
The formation of the cult. They were there
right,
for the ground
like,
level of the ideas and organization and whatever.
It's like he's because of the way that he's presenting his podcast, anybody who's listening he's making them feel like they're an active part of the conversation, even though they're just passive listeners. And it was like, I had always suspected that he had, I think he unintentionally created a cult. And then once he realized he had created a cult, he like started to lean into it more. And that's why he started to go hard right wing. Like, I don't know. Again, I don't know how familiar with you were with Joe Rogan, but he was not right wing before 2011. It was basically like after all the doomsday prepping shit, um, in like 2012 is when he really started like moving to the right. And it was like, I want to say there was like a time he was talking about his daughter learning. She was like 4 or 5 or something, and she was learning jujitsu. And he was like, he started getting worried about her being trans or something. And then it was like
Wait,
right
now
around,
jujitsu makes kids trans?
no, it wasn't the jujitsu. He thought it was the school. He was teaching her jujitsu, and because she was really into it at first, that was like the narrative. And then it was like he started talking about what they were teaching her at school, and like I said, he started being like, I'm worried about her being a lesbian or being trans because of what they teach her. Not like, if she wants to be, that's one thing, but if it's because of what they taught her at school. And I remember like being like, what is this? And so I started marking down in my mind. There was like these moments where I'm like, I don't know if I like this. I don't know if I like this anymore. And then he started bringing on Jordan Peterson, and I'm like, oh hell no. So like, I know it was like, I know Yasi would hear him say anti-woman stuff, and she would get annoyed about it and like kind of tap out. And it was like, those were red flags. But then it was like, once Jordan Peterson started being a frequent guest, and I'm like, what is this? This is like a right wing show now. And it was like at some point, I think it was the second Alex Jones appearance, because it was like the Alex Jones appearances were funny because you knew Alex Jones was gonna smoke weed and say some ridiculous shit. But like by the second one, it's like, oh wait, I think Joe Rogan might actually be like agreeing with him on some of this stuff. And then it was like, time out, time out. I don't know if this isn't fun anymore.
Yeah.
Uh, so that I can explicitly remember that trajectory of like slowly tapping out, and then that last Alex Jones one being like, I don't know what's happening right now. I don't know how we got here.
The Terrence
This
Howard
is
episode
way far right.
is the most recent of any of Rogan. No, the Eric Weinstein addendum to the Terrence Howard Rogan show is the one that I watched, and I skipped through portions of the first of part one because it was too wackadoodle. I couldn't listen to it. It's like, man, this guy didn't finish like, learning all of the properties of math of multiplication.
Right.
Like,
That's what it comes
seriously,
down to.
like he can't talk about this stuff. But then he brings on Eric Weinstein, who's apparently a really polarizing individual, and he broke it down in a way that Terrence Howard's like, okay, I accept that I don't understand this stuff, but you got to pay attention to my other thing because we can sell this. And it's like, man, this guy doesn't stop. And that's it. That's like the most recent stuff I've heard of. But what's interesting about both of those examples is that I don't think Joe Rogan said more than like 30 words, out of a whole whopping like 6 hours of podcast between two episodes. Like, that's like, he didn't say anything. He was just like stupefied the whole time, which I guess that's how we know. It's like,
Well, and that's again, he's not really capable of participating. So it's the reason he had to bring on Eric Weinstein is because when he had Terrence Howard on by himself, he was not capable of shutting him down at any given point, which that's damning. And like you said, Terrence Howard clearly didn't make it through like elementary school math or elementary school biology or anything elementary school and retain it. He may have done it, but he didn't retain any of it. Um, and so the fact that Joe Rogan couldn't just shut down not one point is like
Man, his producer didn't think to look up like, properties of mathematics or properties
right.
of multiplication and division. Just like the simple properties of multiplication and division, which would have very quickly pointed to, yeah, this guy's so full of shit. Like, no need to continue. No, that didn't happen. It takes like 10 seconds to Google search for, properties of multiplication.
Yeah. So it's like,
It on some level it's sad that like, we lose people because of statements about Joe Rogan's output. But at the same time, these are also people who probably didn't retain or never learned enough mathematics to be able to question Terrence Howard.
yeah. Well, and I'm realizing the right wing attempt to destroy the English language by removing pronouns is one of the most ironic results of defunding education, in that it's so obvious that none of these people paid attention during school and now they're trying to like make out pronouns into being some political movement instead of actually just part of the English language. And knowing knowing what has to take place for that to, because it used to be, you remember when people were like talking about critical race theory
Oh man, I'm glad
and that
that kind
shit
of.
just disappeared.
Yeah, well, that's because they all realize that they don't know the first thing about critical race theory.
Right, because it was never actually being taught in elementary schools like they were trying to claim. So
Yeah,
there was never a thing.
all it really would take, I think, is like they had to know somebody who was an academic. That academic was nice enough to point them to the 5 or 6 or 700 level course, some graduate level coursework in critical race theory. Not like an undergrad, definitely not high school. Hell no at the middle school level, most certainly not at the elementary school level. Obviously, their kids are special and go to some crazy preschool where they teach critical race theory. It's like, what? I'm pretty sure that like critical race theory isn't even a concept in elementary ed. I think they've got to move beyond that to like.
They haven't even learned primary colors
Yeah,
in
but they can
kindergarten.
handle critical race theory. Well, they can't handle pronouns. I don't think they can handle critical race theory either, especially if they
Well,
can't
I only
handle.
say that because it's like the anti-pronoun rhetoric has gotten, I don't know if it's hit its peak. It feels like it's not going away. Or it feels like it hasn't started yet going away. Um so for me, it seemed like this litmus test of who made it past fifth grade English, or who passed fifth grade English, because anybody who's like anti-pronoun didn't pass fifth grade English. I want to say maybe even third. I think they taught us pronouns in like
The average American reading level is between a seventh and eighth grade level,
bullshit.
according to the National
Bullshit.
Assessment of Adult
No,
Literacy.
that's like the average being brought up by the upper end.
The bell curve helped out a lot of people there.
Oh my god.
Oh, seventh to eighth grade level. That's just like, man. Oh, wait, hold on. 54% of adults read at or below a sixth grade level.
There you go. That's exactly what I expected.
Oh. The U.S. is ranked 36th in literacy globally.
Well, and then AI is gonna make that shit worse.
Yeah.
Because now you got people who can't read and then can ask fucking AI to read something for them, and then they can't discern whether what they're getting the response back is accurate or not because they didn't read it in the first, like they weren't able to discern with the source material.
Oh man, eventually it's just going to be AIs talking to each other and people signing off on it.
Well, I don't think that the generation is going to be able to use it in the way that they think. Um, because people are figuring out ways to like trick it and prove that it's like um AI generated. So one of the funniest things I've seen lately is that a teacher put whited out instructions for this like specific citation, and the person, the air quote person that they're citing is actually their dog.
Oh.
So any AI generated paper would then generate a citation for an article that was supposedly written by this person's dog. And so they caught people using AI because they fucking tried to turn in this paper with this fake citation. So that's again, it's
Apparently,
like
that's not just like students doing that. People are sending in their resumes with whited out text of the keywords of job
oh yeah.
postings.
Yeah, that was like one of the first things that people started doing. I
Yeah,
remember um
I think that's hilarious. Forced citation of AI generated content. What a fantastic prompt to build into some kind of instructions. It's like that's brilliant.
well, because that's where again it's like you got kids thinking they're gonna outsmart a fucking adult like who's had way more life experience. And so it's like, yeah, this adult knows this AI is out there, and so they're gonna do some shit like that and put um, fucking whited out instructions. So,
Well, at least they're being creative, right? I'm still curious to see like how long it takes before somebody makes some kind of useful AI tool that's not just stealing.
right? Yeah.
I still have my like eyes open, my ears are still open. I'm still waiting, but unfortunately, like all of the really useful AI or AI-ish or AI adjacent technology seems to be baked into purpose-built technology like vehicles, or there's some kind of like AI fine tuning in a camera to get it to output the best quality or the best possible image for a given scene, stuff like that. Um, I got an amplifier recently that has an AI component for tone selection, so I feed it a bunch of words like cosmic radiation and and it gives me a bunch of ambient sounds like delay and reverb soaked guitar sounds, and that's kind of cool. But their I wonder what their tokens are based off of. Did they build them themselves? I can't find any information.
Well, and somebody made the apt observation. It's like what is being described as AI is really just autofill.
Yeah,
Like, and then,
it's like
oh my
I'm pretty
God, it
sure that
gets,
like there's definitely some kind of algorithm that takes the tokens that I've generated and spits out some combination of parameter selection that they can associate with those words. It's that's how those things work, and especially because it has to be connected to the internet for the feature to work. It's not like an app on my phone. It definitely has to connect to the internet for that feature to work.
right.
Otherwise, that like I can generate my own patches and I can select anything that the internet can give me is something that I feasibly could have selected on my own and dialed in on my own. And most of the time when I use this feature, I find myself like recycling the prompt several times. I go through like anywhere from 12 to 18 or 12 to 16 examples before I find one that I think is what I'm going to tinker with for the next, half hour, 45 minutes. And it's weird. I'm instead of dialing the sound in and getting immediate changes to the sound as I play the guitar, I'm waiting for a text based prompt to return some kind of abstract thing so I can play a chord or a sequence of notes to decide, am I going to use this or do I just move on to the next one? And most of the time I end up moving on to the next one because whatever they gave me isn't actually what I was looking for. So it's still back to that, like, yeah, I could have come up with this sound that I spent the last 20 minutes prompting the system to generate. I could have developed that. I could have generated that on my own, probably in like 5 minutes or less. What problem is this actually solving?
Well, and like, I haven't actually seen anything besides, and I don't even know if I would consider the Door Brothers producing anything that's coherent because they tried to make a music video and it wasn't really coherent. So I haven't seen anything that's like video or video game produced with AI that was coherent. None of it. None of it goes more than surface level. Like this person is somewhere else. Like the relationships that it fabricates are like very like, oh, this person was um the other person's aunt or uncle. It can do very basic backstory and it can create backstory, but it's not good. It's not ever producing anything that's like a story or a sequence worth memorizing or not memorizing, worth experiencing that's like new or novel. And then anytime it tries to do physics, it's just nightmare and nightmare fuel. I saw a video of AI created diving and it
Oh, like scuba diving?
no like Olympic diving.
Oh, that stuff's crazy.
And
Or the
the
gymnasts that like fold in and out of themselves.
right.
Oh,
But it's like the Olympic diving one was recent, so it's this isn't even like
I gotta look for this now.
last generation. And so the way it's so far off still for being this much into what's claimed to be advancement for video creation. It's like it's not really creating anything useful. Like as far as visually, like all of the visual creations are good enough to look at and be like, oh, this is like photorealistic in this frame, but anything more than a couple frames, it's like not at all visually uh pleasing, or it
Wow, this
doesn't
is
do
so
anything.
surreal looking.
Yeah. Because then when you realize what a dive is supposed to look like and versus what that is creating, and then you see the people in the crowd clapping
It's like a
and
gymnastics floor routine on water, and they keep slapping the water, but they never actually finish the dive.
and then sometimes they just explode into water in midair.
Yeah, water splashes out of them from nowhere. Dude did a gainer and landed on the platform, but here's a lady. I don't even know what's going on now. This is.
Yeah, it's
Does this need to be watched in reverse? Am I already watching it in reverse? That's not a human being. That, those aren't scores. Those scores are not
and
possible.
that's like the best video out, which again, it's I have no idea how we got to a point where those types of investments can dominate what VC is doing. And there's like, it's legal. It's legal for them to just be burning up money, creating these terrible fucking videos and this useless technology that could potentially turn into some like, there are benefits to AI where I've seen some stuff where it's like, um, detecting breast cancer in people's scans before it develops with a high level accuracy where it's like, yeah, that's great. Um, so why don't we do that instead of try to make fucking art and waste a bunch of time on poorly created art that may never be good. I don't know if AI art, air quote, can ever be good um without just being stole, like if it's mimicking someone else that we as art appreciate, like people who appreciate art have decided is good and it just copies that, that's not producing something good, that's auto-filling something good that we've already decided, like, so those frameworks of, like you're saying, what can it do without scraping and stealing other people's content? I'm interested to see that too, but I don't know if we've seen anything in that realm uh that's actually intellectual property style, like visual or sonic art, especially the sonic art, because it seems like they're just straight up stealing people's voices. um in terms of, I haven't heard any good AI generated instrumental music that's
No,
like
like
not
the stuff that has any portion that's AI generated is sampled and then reorganized by an actual musician who has
right.
sensibilities and taste and can do things with intent. Like there's that's there are a few barriers that AI just can't ever, it can't do because it doesn't know anything. AI trying to tell us what tastes good is like a TikTok video where someone insists that you can make ice cream using mayonnaise, and I'm sure somebody's out there has figured out how to do it. But I'm not fucking trying that shit. Like I don't care how good it is. Somebody else can try it, and that's great. But no. But I'm also not on board with like mayonnaise and a lot of things, and I think it's just the idea of whipped up oily egg white being added to something. That's not to say that I don't appreciate mayonnaise on like a sandwich. I've used mayonnaise to pan fry some chicken before. It's actually really good. Mayonnaise for grilled cheese sandwich actually works really fucking well. But yeah, no, there are too many of those weird TikTok videos where someone's making something that just everything about it, everything about it makes me say this can't be good, and then I just
So on that, before we could leave that subject, one thing I was really surprised about is how well mayonnaise works on breakfast sandwiches.
yeah,
It actually really works. I was stunned and shocked that I enjoyed it.
it's
Um,
egg.
right, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it makes
Of
perfect sense
course,
on a
makes
breakfast
perfect
sandwich.
sense when you taste it,
Yeah,
but when like before you taste it, you would see it, and you if it was written down, it'd be like, I don't know about that.
man, I love mayonnaise on like French fries or any kind of potato. I'll put mayonnaise on a
Oh
potato,
yeah,
and
yeah,
it's
yeah,
just like, yeah, give me some
sure.
more of that. I'll mix some like ketchup and or mustard or insert whatever I can find if I want something a little bit more exotic than just plain mayonnaise on a French fry. I'm all about taking like whatever like there's not enough salad dressing to put it on a salad, but I can sure put it in some mayo and like put that on some French fries and trying that because that's actually really exciting. It's like probably the only way that I'll eat Thousand Island salad dressing or Catalina or any of the other ones that aren't like still within the realm of oil based, or there are a few like cream based ones that I'll do.
I started eating mayonnaise on French fries in high school. This there was like a Penn Station, and I mean I don't know if the one in Broad Ripple still exists, but this dude, I think his name was Joe. He swore up and down. He's like, man, you got to try the French fries with the mayonnaise, and it was like he got me hooked. And it was like from that point on, Penn Station fries with mayonnaise was like the pinnacle of like eat out fries to me. It was like that, then Rallies,
Man, Rally's
and then
fries are so
like
good.
yeah. But yeah, like I don't, and then I think after a while they changed the oil or something in the mayonnaise, and then it just wasn't as good. So it's like now I'm realizing the oils that we have in our fucking mayos are just like not good for the most part. And so it's really hard to fucking find a mayonnaise on the shelf that's not like machine oil.
Man, mayonnaise is really easy to make.
I mean, for sure, but it's like at the same time, it's like it shouldn't be that hard to find some shit that's like not filled with machine oil on the shelf.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, it's really easy to make. It's such a basic condiment that
Oil,
it shouldn't
egg,
be
lemon juice,
that
mustard,
hard.
salt, pepper. That's like one, two, three, four, five, six. That's two more ingredients than beer.
And it's like there's no reason that corn syrup needs to be in ketchup,
Wait,
but it's
as
really
if
hard.
tomatoes weren't sweet enough already. Like
Right.
seriously.
But it's really hard to find ketchup without corn syrup where you're like, dude, why? Why did you have to put this in there? Just don't put it in. Just don't put it in. It's fine. But no.
Let's see. There's a soy lecithin is in like everything.
Hmm.
Like that's something that doesn't if people actually consumed food at a reasonable rate and weren't buying giant like last a month tubs of things, then they probably wouldn't need that much soy lecithin.
Well, and it's they buy the last a month tubs and then eat it in a week. Because we're not meant to have that much food sitting around all the fucking time.
It's an emulsifier, stabilizer, lubricant, antioxidant, and flavor protector. Flavor protector. Lubricant. Stabilizer. It sounds like the kind of thing you use in an engine. An emulsifier that stabilizes and lubricates. That's totally the kind of thing that I want to put in my engine.
Well, and I don't know if it's just a matter of like the boomers all dying off, but the post World War II scarcity mindset that they haven't gotten out of has like trickled down, and people are, our grocery stores hoard. Like that's the only way we should really be seeing the long-term stuff on the shelves is basically like they're hoarding food, trying to sell it to us to then hoard. But
well, I think that the bulk goods market emerged because there are some people who live way out in the middle of nowhere, and it's a pain in the ass to drive into town to go to the closest grocery store, or they've got large families and they're consuming large amounts of
they shouldn't be living there. They shouldn't fucking be living there. They absolutely should not be living in those places.
Yeah, probably.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you got a family of 8, and you're trying to homeschool all of them.
Everything is fine until the fucking Hurricane Helen comes and fucking floods the pass and washes away the road. And now you got a family of 8 stuck in a goddamn fucking house that nobody can get to because they shouldn't have been living there.
Because now their mountain home is surrounded by a moat in the mountains.
White flight is a fucking pox upon this nation. There's so many problems caused by white flight and all these white people.
Yeah, but nobody
going and living in places that they shouldn't be living.
Nobody moves in the mountains expecting to wake up with a moat. Like,
right?
That's exactly. So fucked up.
No, that's like the last thing.
That's the last thing on that shouldn't even be on the bingo card.
No, but
Mountain
they
Fortress
shouldn't be
moat.
moving in the fucking mountains in the first place. Like, especially if they're then going to plan to have some kids and have those kids be growing up be some goddamn weirdos because they weren't around enough people to socialize, and now you got some goddamn mountain kids stuck in a fucking mountain, afraid of the people coming rescuing them because they've never seen outsiders before. So it's like that shit is never gonna end well because they just never should have been. All these people in places they don't belong. They never should have been. All these fucking swamp people. No, they shouldn't be living there either.
Their only exposure to other humans is like porn and
yes.
YouTube.
Yeah. So it's like, man, I do feel bad for the children that are born into those situations, but I do not feel bad for the people who move to those places and then complain about not having fucking fresh food because they don't live near a goddamn grocery store or don't have the capacity to like grow their own wheat and fucking mill their own flour, grow their own vegetables. It's like, if you don't have that capacity, don't fucking move all the way out to the goddamn edge of fucking civilization. It's fairly simple. And this is kind of where it's like, we have civilization because everybody isn't capable of being everything. I can't be my own fucking fire department. I can't be my own goddamn farmer. I can't be my own poultry farmer. I can't be my own dairy farmer. I live in the city. I can't farm shit. So I have to like depend upon other farmers who have farmland to take care of that. And so it's
and they're also in a location that makes it a lot easier for them to grow those goods in sufficiently large. And by sufficiently large, I mean like absolutely like getting the maximum value out of that acreage that they possibly can, kind of farming. And
those people are keeping tanks of gasoline so they never fucking run out because they don't live close to a gas station. So it's like those specific people prepare for it so they never get in these situations where it's like They always have fresh food because it's like the Amish don't have the same problems as Americans that live in cities. And it's because they have a lifestyle that allows them to be more self-sufficient as a community because they also then depend upon each other more more specifically with specific roles, whereas like everybody in America in the economy basically uses money as a means of like engaging, and you don't know when you're going to need somebody. So it's like if you as a person who fixes a lot of your shit then encounter a problem that you can't fix, you have to use money to engage the person who's then going to fix that thing. So if it's like a pipe or a toilet or some shit that you may be able to fix normally, but it's past your point of being able to fix it, well, you're not always going to have a goddamn plumber in your circle of friends that's going to be able to come. So then you have to engage with somebody who's capable, who's trustworthy, and that medium that you're going to use to exchange is most likely going to be money because that's the agreement we've come to as a civilization as of now. And so when people choose to like go away from that and then deal with the repercussions that come with like not living in a civilized society, it's like I can only feel bad for the children, not the adults, because it's like, you know, y'all chose to like leave the places where we're trying for all of the ills of civilization and society. It's trying to find some sort of balance. And the problem is like there's always going to be these people who are hell bent on creating an imbalance in their favor. So that's why society and civilization always have these imbalances. But in reality, it's trying constantly to find a balance. And so again, when people like actively leave that, I have to question their confidence in their like if their confidence in their capacity to self-sustain was accurate or not, because most of them it's not accurate. Like self-sustenance is really hard, especially when you start taking things like electricity or things like that into account, or like um maintenance for the roads. Like, oh, so you're gonna farm and you're gonna shovel all the goddamn snow on the roads in front of your house too? Not just in front of your house, all the way from your house to um where you need to go. And that's where it's like, yeah, people share responsibilities for coexistence on all these parts of civilization that like nobody really thinks about until it's necessary. Like nobody, all the people who drive the salt trucks and the fucking shovel trucks, nobody gives a fuck about them right now. Nobody's thinking. I don't know if anybody ever thanks them, but nobody's thinking about those people right now because the snow hasn't hit yet. But you can best believe as soon as the snow hits, those fucking people's phones are gonna be ringing. You ready to come drive these salt trucks? Yeah, yeah, it's the season again. They're gonna have to start talking nice and start fucking treating them like people and treating them like humans again because they need them. And it's like again, the rest of that year when you don't need the salt truck drivers and you don't need the shovel drivers, like the way society just like pushes those people to the backs of their mind and just forgets about them. It's like this cycle that we can break. We can definitely break it, but it doesn't feel like anybody's actively trying to break it. And it's like we're chasing traditions of like still ignoring.
So, according to snowplownews.com, this is a legit site, man. They've got a lot of false color visualizations of projections from La Nina, and they're predicting a a really good season for the snow plowing community. Above average snowfall, early winter months. Snowplow.com. Snowplownews.com.
No, I mean I believe it.
I do. No, they're probably like on it. They're really their industry depends on this kind of accuracy.
Right, and it's like who's gonna be better at predicting how the snow's gonna fall than the people who it's literally their job to deal with it every year. Because I know I'm feeling like the dryness that's hitting, even though it's warm right now. We've had some major fluctuations between heat and cold in the past few days, and it's like my skin is so fucking dry, and I feel like that dryness is an indicator of a harsh winter that's gonna happen. Where I'm like, I
So for the
usually
past
don't.
few years, there's been a lot of flooding.
Yeah.
Like a lot more flooding than I remember growing up, and not just that, but flooding in places that flooding isn't supposed to happen. And it's not like every year, but lately it seems like every year. And then there are places where it's flooding like way more than normal, like Dubai, which shouldn't be
Well, but at the
flooding at
same
all.
time,
Like,
this is like the stuff I explicitly remember circa 2001 um and 2000 with Al Gore. This is what they were saying was going to happen, and
yeah.
everybody was like making it seem like Al Gore was a fucking idiot because he was trying to say that like California could end up underwater one day, and they were making fun of the way he talked and like the idea that fucking the East Coast could ever be underwater, or Louisiana could be underwater. And it's like, yeah, I don't know if he's laughing now, but he was definitely right. It's not funny. So I doubt he's actually laughing about it.
I imagine that
But
he's like sad that like
right,
all the things
yeah.
that he warned us about are happening and sooner than he had predicted.
Because it wasn't his predictions. He was just the
Or the message.
fucking
Yeah.
exactly. He became the face of the message where he consulted a bunch of scientists and fucking climatologists, and that was why he was like the face of that film, which is like it's this is why it's shit like that where I don't end up getting involved in politics in America because people allow politics to get in the way of like real world issues and real world problems. And the fact that people politicize climate change is why we have these fucking floods and shit so frequently. And like the shit that's happening in Spain or just happened in Spain,
Yeah.
I don't know, man. They might fucking kill the king over there because again, the people at the top are benefiting while the people at the bottom are dying from the fucking repercussions, and the people at the top are acting like this shit isn't really happening, or they use it to make it um seem like voting for them is going to be like a move in a different direction, and then they keep moving towards the fucking oil companies because that part where we're not actually divesting from the oil companies or from it's not even about the oil companies because then as you always point out it's like the practices surrounding EVs aren't any better and they're not contributing to uh solving climate change because they're making climate problems worse. And so it's like if we get a solution that's being sold to us that's in some ways worse than what it's claiming to solve, then it's going to be impossible for an American to figure out like the correct path because there is no correct path,
I
which is
mean,
why.
as an American that is deeply interested in how all of this pans out, I want a front row seat as as much as I sound like I'm anti electric vehicle. I'm not. I actually believe that it's the future. We just have to figure out a way to get there that isn't completely fucked up. Like if it's somehow not better than what we've got, then I don't see how it's not actually a better solution. It's just an alternative to what we've got, which isn't changing anything. There's got to be a way to do it better. There's got to be a better way to do all of these things. There's a power source that's we're not allowed to use yet for some fucked up reason. That might be it. There's some way to create these motor structures so that they don't destroy the earth, just extracting the materials. There's got to be a way to build batteries, or to develop an energy induction system that allows vehicles to travel over certain types of roads with energy supplied by the road itself. There's a way to do all of this stuff. We're just not allowed to do it because there's the profit motive is low, and the investment would require decades, and that's not the kind of thing that's not nation level capital investment. That's not corporate level capital investment. That's not even like international mega conglomerate level capital investment. That's nation decades long, 50-year, decades long capital investment, which is like multi-generation investment. It's not the kind of thing that any board is ever going to get on, board of investors for Tesla or SpaceX or whatever, is ever going to get on board for, because they're not going to get to see their return. They might develop some weird technology that allows them to turn their to extend the length of their telomeres, and they'll live long enough to experience the benefits of that kind of capital investment. But I don't think that's going to happen. That's like the super science fiction solution. If we can extend telomeres, then money's not even really necessary.
Which again, I don't think that is impossible, but I also don't think it's necessarily going to be money that is going to be the solution. Because in part, it's like, what if the way to extend telomeres was like not living in a polluted environment?
Oh man, if it was like that simple,
you know, if it was that simple, and it might be that simple because the immortal jellyfish and things like that are found like in the ocean. So when you have these organisms that are effectively immortal, as long as they don't come into contact with a toxic environment or a predator.
Yeah, as long as they live in an extremely caustic and dangerous environment.
I mean, they
to us, not to them.
Right. They developed in those environments, so that is in terms of like their
that's their amniotic fluid.
Right, and for them, it's the best environment in which to have a homeostatic existence. Like, to me, again, that demonstrates that potentially the answer to what you're saying in terms of like how do we extend our telomeres is like maybe just not pollute our shit. But that seems such a like oversimplified prospect.
Yeah, no, I mean that'd be the way to do it, but the problem is that,
like, how do you undo this current civilization?
I mean,
and overcomplicate it. And that's the
I think
that's the difficult
the
prospect.
First way to do it, the first phase involves creating a hamburger that extends telomeres, and first get people hooked on the telomere extending hamburger, and then eventually once they realize that they just want the extended telomeres, they'll move on to a different type of telomere extension mechanism. No longer a hamburger. It could be something else.
Do these people deserve to have their telomeres lengthened?
Probably not.
that's part of the issue too. Is like if the only way you can get somebody to work to extend their telomeres is like by feeding it to them through a hamburger, do they deserve that shit? I don't think so. Like, because part of it is like, I know the shit that I've gone through. Like, I've gone through fucking sweat. Have you ever been in a sweat lodge?
I've been in a sauna before, but not a sweat
lodge.
No.
A sauna is not a sweat lodge.
No, I've not been in a sweat lodge.
Because here's one of the main differences. You're in control in a sauna. You're not in control in the sweat lodge. You can get out of the sweat lodge, But if you're in the very back of the sweat lodge, especially like the larger one gets, there can be up, the ones I've been in, there was like 30 people in it at a time. So it's like if you're trying to get out, you're gonna have to fucking try to step over people in complete darkness, not fall into a fucking fire pit in the process. And there's like elderly people in there. So you're like tapping out while elderly people aren't tapping out. So there's a whole ego element to it that then makes you like not tap out if you're like wrapped up in your ego. And so it's like, it's that if people are doing that to try to like lengthen their telomeres, I don't think that person who just will eat a hamburger deserves telomere lengthening as much as the person who's willing to sit in a fucking pitch black lodge at 140 degrees
But wait. But
be able to get
hear
out.
me out. What if the hamburgers only provide like a 5% telomere extension over the course of a year worth of telomere hamburgers, and that those proceeds go to clean up the environment for communities that want to have telomere extension naturally?
I mean,
I'm trying to work within the framework that America's given us here. So.
I'm against lazy people like getting life extension by proxy of like science.
Yeah.
Like that's part of the problem is science is doing all this stuff to lengthen people's lives, and then the people who don't want to contribute, even if it's just by making like not causing a problem, because some people, they could contribute by just not making everybody's life around them worse. And like you don't have to like work to make it better, just don't fucking throw trash on the ground, don't like piss on the fucking tree when you could go to the bathroom. Like there's all these things that, because I'm like, I see litter on the ground in 2024 and I'm like, dude, seriously? Like they make jokes about this stuff in movies like fucking Anchorman where people were littering in the past, but the idea that somebody's like still littering in 2024, I'm like, I want to find that motherfucker and like hit them. Like they're making everybody's lives worse, and there comes a certain point where like I don't want to be nice to those people anymore. I want to stop being nice to those people because they're like making things more difficult. And it's like I think we just have to go through a period where we like not physically violent against people, but it's like we can't treat adults with kid gloves when they do shit that they should have stopped doing as children. Like if you're somebody who's littering as an adult and you do it in front of another person, like you should be made to feel stupid, and like maybe they should get like smacked or something. It's like there's something about like when people like not punched to the point where you get knocked out, but sometimes people just like it takes being smacked to realize that like, oh, my cheek is stinging. Like there's a repercussion for what I just did. Like sometimes that's the only way that there's these certain types of people can like understand that their actions affect other people around them. And there's just too many of those people in America where I'm like, I don't know if they can be saved. And it's like because the rest of the world it seems for the most part is doing fine. Like when you look at the population growth, the rest of the world is doing fine. So it's like maybe America is really just a problem, and we kind of gotta like let everybody leave us behind.
And what are we gonna do to get like? I really just want telomere extending hamburgers. That's really all I want. I don't know. I think you're right.
I mean,
we don't deserve telomere hamburgers.
The issue is it's not me. I know for a fact that fasting and like doing saunas at a reasonable temperature, not too hot, extends telomeres. So it's like the things that are anti-capitalist are what extends the telomeres. Like all you
I
have to
know.
do is like not
I know
eat.
they're not good for me. I just want the hamburger to be good
No,
for me.
I'm
Is what I think
saying,
is what I
no, I'm
mean.
saying right now, we know for a fact if you want to extend your telomeres, just don't eat. And like straight
Yeah.
up, that works. It literally works.
Also, I know that hamburgers aren't actually good for me. Like, especially like the ones that are clearly like soaking in oils that just cooking in themselves. They're just the juice that they are. As like each one of those, each bite is like a few seconds off of the lifespan. Nothing that tastes like that can be good for you.